Vince McMahon has historically always gotten what he wanted. He wanted his father's wrestling company, he wanted all the territories, he wanted to run his greatest rivals out of business and make all of their stars look like dicks on TV, and, well, you guessed it, he got all of that and then some. In fact, for a man whose perversions and interests are reportedly as outlandish as his, he'd probably never heard the word no until he pitched the angle where he got Stephanie pregnant. But just because he always gets his way in the end, doesn't mean that his hand isn't forced along the way somewhere. For all he might stamp his feet and throw interns across a room, there are times when the best laid plans need to be reluctantly torn up. Sometimes for a night, sometimes for good, but whatever wins his employees have had over the years are to be savoured for the rest of their careers. So, and again, I am really sorry about the phrasing of this, my name is Adam Cleary and these are 10 times Vince McMahon was forced to swallow his pride. Number 10. Goldberg. You could write an entire list on all the times Vince McMahon must have looked at the legacy of the invasion angle and begrudgingly admitted he should have done things differently. Most, if not all of these occasions would be him just realizing he needed WCW's biggest stars and holding back on certain angles until their contracts were up. Top of that list, though, was Goldberg. Where Hogan, Hall, Nash, and Flair were all arguably bigger names in the industry, Goldberg was WCW's prized possession and crucially had never been anywhere near a WWF ring. When he finally debuted the night after WrestleMania 2003, fans expected big things, but merely a year later at WrestleMania, both he and Lesnar were booed out of the building and the company. Old Bill went into relative hiding from the wrestling world for over a decade and Vince was more than happy to let him. However, with WrestleMania season approaching in 2017 and 2K in desperate need of something different to promote the next WWE game around, Vince put his personal feelings aside and reached out. What followed defied belief, and then what followed after that also defied belief, and then what happened at Crown Jewel defied belief all over again. Number 9. Ending the brand split. When WWE originally split Raw and SmackDown into full-time separate brands, Vince's logic was simple. People want competition and choice, so we might as well be the ones to provide it. In 2002, the decision was made, the roster divided in half, and for 9 long years, both shows operated independently with virtually no issues. But the longer time went on, the more the company found itself unable to arrest the declining ratings. House show attendances for each brand were down, pay-per-view buy rates were struggling, and neither show really felt like it had the requisite depth of roster to really hook new viewers. WWE's biggest names from the turn of the millennium had mostly left the company, and in their stead, very few new faces had fully stepped up. With seemingly no other option, Vince was forced to recognize that he'd simply been unable to create enough new stars to carry 2 separate shows and merge them again to hide the lack of drawing power. Back in 2002, The Rock, The Undertaker, Kurt Angle, Scott Hall, Kevin Nash, Chris Benoit, and Hulk Hogan had all been the first names picked. 9 years later, only the dead man remained, and the likes of Del Rio, Miz, Swagger, and Sheamus just weren't on that sort of level. Number 8. The ultimate deletion. Vince McMahon hated everything about the final deletion. In Matt Hardy, he saw little more than a very average worker who'd fallen down the industry into much smaller promotions and was now putting out some career's worst work in a desperate attempt to stay relevant. However, the match became rightly the biggest thing in professional wrestling. It was an overnight viral sensation, endlessly quotable, and made Hardy the hottest property on the independent scene for the better part of an entire year. Vince wanted nothing to do with any of it except the baffling amounts of money it was going to make. Throwing his hands up and accepting that he just didn't get it, Vince rehired the Hardy Boys and begrudgingly allowed the Elder to sculpt his own version for an episode of Monday Night Raw. But not without reaching his hand all the way up Michael Cole's backside to have him puppet the words, "What you're about to see is obnoxious," live on commentary right before it started. Number 7. WrestleMania 7. During the build-up to 1991's WrestleMania 7, WWE relocated from the 100,000 capacity Los Angeles Memorial Coliseum to the adjacent Los Angeles Memorial Sports Arena. They did this for what it described as security concerns in the wake of Sergeant Slaughter's portrayal of an Iraqi sympathizer during the Gulf War. The line was that they were worried a crowd so large would contain some individuals who might cause a problem. However, one major detail here is that the new venue carried a capacity of only around 17,000, with Bruce Pritchard, Dave Meltzer, and Slam magazine all since being on record as saying the WWF hadn't sold anywhere near their projected number of tickets and had virtually zero chance of even half filling the seats of the stadium. Despite a card that included Hulk Hogan, Ultimate Warrior, and Randy Savage, interest in the show was drastically lower than last year's Ultimate Challenge main event. And Vince, reluctantly, was forced to scale it down to avoid embarrassment. Number 6, the Wednesday Night War, full stop. WWE does not care about the competition. What goes on in the world of pro wrestling has zero impact on the decisions that get made in the world of sports entertainment. It doesn't matter what you've achieved in another promotion, when you arrive in the big leagues, you've got to prove yourself all over again. WWE is and always will be an island. Or at least that's what they've spent every hour of weekly television since WCW folded trying to convince you. When All Elite Wrestling formally launched with a disgruntled ex-WWE mid-carder at the wheel and an enthused billionaire pumping the gas, WWE broke the habit of a lifetime and reacted. They took NXT, their one unsullied asset, and weaponized it for Wednesday nights. Presumably scared of what AEW could do if allowed to broadcast unopposed every week, Vince moved mountains to ensure its potential audience was split. The result have been nearly 2 million people tuning in midweek to watch wrestling, but their numbers fluctuating wildly between the two products. Still though, even making Vince blink like this represented a big win for AEW. Number 5, WWF New York. Just prior to the turn of the millennium, Vince decided to open WWF New York. Part nightclub, part restaurant, part sports bar in the very heart of Times Square, it was regularly cut to during live broadcasts to show rambunctious crowds of almost universally middle-aged men losing their nut behind an injured wrestler, or more frequently, ogling Terry Runnels. In McMahon's mind, this was a business no-brainer. Everyone likes burgers, everyone likes beer, but their USP was the ability to screen any live wrestling show they wanted and draw the punters in by dangling the enticing carrot of live appearances from sports entertainers. The only problem he refused to accept was that it's nearly impossible to make any money in Times Square. Well, unless of course you are that one hustler who managed to con Andy Murray out of about $25 for his mixtape when we were over for WrestleMania last year. The rent for all the premises in that particular part of New York City is simply unbelievable, to the point where the venue lost the company an estimated $25 million in just 4 short years. Linda McMahon, stepping in to be the adult in the situation, closed it down in 2003. Number 4, the Lex Express. Shortly after Hulk Hogan left WWE in June 1993, Vince McMahon was so obsessed with the indifferent numbers Bret Hart had posted that he believed finding the next Hulkster was the only way to go. Then a heel, Lex Luger really didn't want to be like Hulk Hogan, but Vince's erection pulsed too hard for anyone to see that. He threw more money at the push than any wrestler had ever seen in the entire history of the business, with the Luger bust the cherry on this particular misguided cake. Amazingly, it didn't work, and by the Royal Rumble some mere months later, fans were beginning to reject the idea. With WrestleMania hanging in the balance, a co-winner's gimmick was called for the Rumble, with Vince needing to see which way the fans would go. Unanimously, they wanted Hart over Luger, and in less than 1 year, the entire project had fallen flat. Not convinced he could just push Luger regardless though, lol how times change, Bret Hart was given the main event against Yokozuna, with Luger facing the same man earlier in the night. A convoluted solution, but one Vince was forced into. Number 3, re-signing CM Punk. "You have me over a barrel here," were the words uttered by Vince McMahon to CM Punk during the infamous Money in the Bank 2011 pay-per-view. With the show already begun, Punk was still to sign a new contract with WWE and, as things stood, was legitimately leaving the company at midnight. Yes, this was the angle going into the show, but it was also the reality. Punk had been on the fence about renewing his terms because, in his mind, he was a main eventer being treated like a member of the mid-card. He was a small indie guy with an MMA style and a reputation, and literally name, created in other wrestling promotions. WWE stars were, where possible, born and bred in-house and looked, sounded, and wrestled nothing like he did. He was so far down the pecking order because that's where Vince McMahon wanted him to be. However, seeing the interest generated from his promos and the reactions he got from the fans, he had no option but to give him everything he wanted, starting that very night with a bumper new deal and the WWE Championship. Number 2, the 2010 recruitment change. Part 2 in a little trilogy here that included the 2011 Money in the Bank main event, but arguably started a year prior. CM Punk's position within WWE was a byproduct of Vince's own failings of sticking to the tried and tested formula of making the company stars even as pro wrestling tastes were changing drastically. With the company largely comprised of big men who were limited technically but looked great in the ring and who had next to no natural charisma but could read the promos they were handed efficiently enough, is it any wonder CM Punk looked light years ahead of the rest of the roster? Times had changed, and despite resisting it for years, Vince was slowly having to change with them. After years, literally years of being obsessed with their own developmental system, WWE suddenly went after workers like CM Punk and Daniel Bryan. Men who'd done it all on the independent circuit and brought years of experience and support with them. In the land of the Giants, they looked ridiculous, but not as ridiculous as Vince would have felt in having to turn to them. Number 1, Daniel Bryan. Despite this image here being one of the most iconic ever captured in a WWE ring, it was never a moment that was supposed to happen. Had Vince McMahon had his way, that would be either Randy Orton or Batista holding those belts aloft, and not an underutilized indie darling previously regarded as a B-plus player. However, at the end of that year's Royal Rumble, something was desperately wrong with the booking. Batista, billed as a returning hero, was booed out of the arena, and his proposed main event feud with former stablemate Randy Orton was forcing the audience away in droves. It was, indisputably, Daniel Bryan's year, but the men at the top didn't seem to realize. The story goes that, baffled by the rejection of Batista and the popularity of Bryan, Vince called a meeting where he demanded answers. After having Bryan's ability, personality, charisma, history, charm, and relatability all explained to him, the chairman paused before simply muttering, "But just look at Batista." He didn't get it, and arguably still doesn't, but determined not to have his biggest show hijacked, he swallowed his pride and relented. The rest, as they say, is history. So there you have it, those are 10 times Vince McMahon was forced to swallow his pride, read to you by a man who wrote this ages ago, and really hope it comes out before WrestleMania gets cancelled. Let us know what you made of it all in the comments below, and of course don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. In the meantime though, thank you so much for watching. I've of course been Adam Cleary, and I will see you soon. Goodbye.